Hey, welcome to the Authors Hour. My name is Fred Zerm. I represent the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We're a volunteer organization that aims to encourage writers and writing on the grounds here at Chautauqua and beyond by both supporting and supplementing the activities of the institution's Writers Center. We have weekly events when we're in season. This is the last of our weekly events for this season. We sponsor the Authors Hour on Thursdays. On Tuesdays, right after the Poetry Brown Bag, we offer informal critiques. So not this coming Tuesday because this season, alas, will be over. But next year on a Tuesday, if you have one page of poetry or prose, bring 10 copies to the poetry room, and a published writer, sometimes me, sometimes Janae Costner, will lead a discussion of your work. So you should bring 10 copies, which is slightly optimistic, but we usually get 5 or 6 people there. Okay. We have open mic most Sundays, but not this Sunday, since most people will be packing and leaving or going to hear the final 3 taps. That's at 5 o'clock. Prose room for writers and listeners 18 and older. At halftime, I'll talk to you about all the annual events that you missed, so you can maybe get on board for next year. We are privileged to have 2 people working together today. So first introduce Mark Altschuler, a professor of English, that's on the left there, a professor of English at Bergen County College in Paramus, New Jersey, a season-long Chautauquan since 1996. One of the organizers of the softball. Are you officially commissioner? Or
I am, and I'm embarrassed by the title.
Okay, we just call him commish. Okay, a teacher of special studies courses at Chautauqua. He's a little modest about that. He's headed the Saturday morning special studies short story discussion group for a long time, plus teaching some regular session groups. He's also a longtime friend of Jason Irwin. So he is going to read something he wrote. Jason, who I'll introduce in more detail in between, will then read some of his poems, including the poems you got copies of, and then Mark will do a combination discussion and dialogue with Jason about his poetry. Little bit of an experiment for us, but I have high hopes. So first of all, Mark Altschuler.
Okay, can you hear? Yeah. So first of all, I'd like to thank Fred Zerm, who does a lot of work to make the literary arts happen around here. And it's a pleasure to be here with Jason Irwin, who drove all the way from Pittsburgh this morning. So I consider myself Jason's warm-up act. But they just gave me a microphone. I was thinking of breaking into a Frank Sinatra medley or something. I'll spare you that. What I'm going to do is share with you a prose piece. I really don't write poetry. I hack around at prose, and at a Chautauqua writing workshop, I started writing this piece, and I'm still kind of playing with it. I'll give you a little background, though. Some of you might know William Hayen. He's a poet, and he's taught a lot of writing workshops here, poetry workshops. And he was here in 2017, and the book he was talking about then is his book of poems about the Holocaust. He feels a burden as the child of German immigrants to this country, and he had uncles who fought for Germany in World War II. And so he talked, when he was here, he talked about that burden he felt, and his poems come out of that sense. So I'm going to start with a William Hayen poem called Ardor. Dr. Neasley sat with Mengele at a work table, perusing records on twins. All that was known of them from birth to deportation, to elimination, to dissection. Mengele noticed a spot of grease on an otherwise bright blue folder. He leveled his eyes and voice at his assistant. How, he demanded, can you be so careless with the files which I've compiled with so much love? So, reading Bill Hayen's poems in his book, The Candle, those are his Holocaust poems, helps me honor the people of my parents' generation and grandparents' generation, survivors all, German Jewish Holocaust survivors that I knew as a child. In Bill Hayen's poem, Dr. Mengele feels love for his files, but feels nothing for his victims. As a child, I did not feel much about the Holocaust. No one in the family talked about it. My parents were Holocaust survivors. That's what I would call them, but that's not what they would call themselves. My mother from Vienna, my father from Germany got out. They did not end up in camps. They ended up in safety in Philadelphia. But survivors were like wallpaper in my family's living room, just part of my childhood. Their immigration story goes like this. They fled to safety in Philadelphia, and it's a story of downward mobility. It's the opposite of normal American immigration stories. The men in Germany had been merchants, medical doctors, lawyers. My grandfather, Max Altschuler, had been an importer of fine china from Europe to the United States. He was a successful businessman in Germany. In Philly, in his 70s, he worked as a stock clerk in Gimbel's department store. I do not think this country ever felt like home to him. And by the way, I never met him. He died before I was born, but I heard stories. From the stories I heard, a real German autocrat. My paternal grandmother had many friends, nearly all German Jewish Holocaust survivors. They seemed like people from an alien planet to me. The two-generation gap probably often creates that sense of separation, but this was more. For example, their names. They had last names like Bloch and Spangenthal and Lervenstein. My sister and I would say the names and laugh at the sounds. Those names fell in our suburban American middle-class ears as comical and ridiculous. What made sense to me? Baseball cards, bubble gum, sitcoms, McDonald's. That was my world. I remember my grandmother's friend, Ernst Bloch. He was a short man with a thick German accent. He always wore three-piece suits and had very formal manners. I was somewhat aware that he was on a restricted diet. He was always Herr Bloch to my grandmother. The intimacy of friendship did not extinguish the formality of those aristocratic European manners. I, as a casual American child, found it all pretty ridiculous and snickered. Ernst Bloch, I do not have grandparents or parents here now to verify the story. I think it goes like this. He had been in a camp and had been used by one of Dr. Mengele's, he had been in a camp and had been used for one of Dr. Mengele's medical adventures. He had had half his stomach surgically removed as an experiment to see how a human being could live in that condition. Mr. Bloch survived, made his way to Philly while his family all perished in Europe. He lived with half a stomach until age 95. He defied Dr. Mengele. What can we do against atrocity? We can assert dignity a la Ernst Bloch. We can write some lines of poetry, a la Bill Hayen. Life lived, art created, defiance, a kind of, a sort of trinity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Very, very moving. And you're very modest about your writing.
Yeah.
We will now move on to Jason Irwin. He's the author of 3 collections of poetry: The History of Our Vagrancies, A Blister of Stars, Watering the Dead, and the chapbooks, and short books, Where You Are, and Some Days It's a Love Story. He has also had nonfiction published in Coal Hill Review, Santa Ana Review, and The Catholic Worker, among others. He grew up in Dunkirk, New York, and now lives in Pittsburgh. And most importantly, he was an intern at the Writers Center. I will save annual events, which I skipped, until the end of the Friends of the Chicago Writers Center, so we have more time to hear Jason Irwin.
Hello.
Wow.
Thanks very much for coming. Thanks to Fred and Mark. Mark, thanks very much. Staying at Mark's place tonight.
Now you tell me.
So anyone else who needs a place? We have to move. Right? Okay. The first poem is called On the Ride Home. Tuesday was a runny nose. The bus limped and moaned over the sloping streets of cracked brick like an arthritic mammoth. In the back, a blind man sang, "How much farther? How much farther?" His baritone echoing our own unanswered prayer. How many more mornings and evenings on this bus, these city streets, days spent in offices, factories, and grocery stores. At the corner of Lincoln and Leamington, the brakes hit as sunlight cuts through a horizon of Lego-like apartment buildings. On the sidewalk, 2 boys jump in a puddle. Big toothed smiles swallow their skinny faces, arms flailing as water stains their boots and jeans. When the bus pulls away, I watch them dissolve into shadow, as if trapped in another time. Billboards sell redemption and cheap auto insurance. I close my eyes, lean my head back, and listen to the blind man sing. This is called Poem About My Father Disguised as the End of the World. And we're not discussing that one, because I don't know what it's about. Okay. Poem about my father disguised as the end of the world. Everyone knows this landscape is a facade. Propped up horizon of corkboard and tin. Curve of flesh, lick of salt. It's all we can do to endure the next few hours. Gridlock on the drive home. The unavoidable reckoning of empty rooms. Who can say for certain we are not descended from the stars? When I was a boy, I lay in bed while my veins burned. My father was an asteroid. Some nights I caught sight of him crashing through space. Other times he was the whiskey in my glass, the voice crying no. The almanac predicts the treacherous end. There'll be no more pleasantry, no more high-speed streaming of your favorite natural disaster. No VIP value meals or cream in your coffee. So call down the gods if you want, the traffic police, insurance men. They're only smoke signals in the fog, hawkers on the midway, nails bitten down. This is a prose poem titled Writing to Remember. This morning while driving, sunlight hit my hands. My veins pulsed in the glow. It reminded me of our conversation last night about that man in Arizona who learned to capture moonlight and heal the body. He said there wasn't much going on, nothing on TV but commercials. I was engulfed in Camus. The scene where the boy is convulsing with plague filled me with envy. On the news, they talked about the mysterious death of a supermodel, the economy, the war, how bodies were thrown into wells and children with missing limbs had flies covering their faces. I'm drinking coffee now. It's 3 p.m, overcast. I'm still without work, writing this letter to remember. I forget so many things. This poem is called The History of Our Vagrancies, and I was trying to write something like Walt Whitman about the history of Dunkirk, where I grew up. And a lot of it is taken from a book called Out of the Wilderness by Leslie F. Chard, who was a local historian. The History of Our Vagrancies. Out of Paris in Oneida, in an ox-driven sleigh to New Amsterdam, across the frozen waters to a tiny creek-fed cabin surrounded by sycamore and shale. From the land of the Seneca to Canada Way and Chadwick's Bay. From a man named Smith to disaster and resurrection. The war over salt and the panic of 37. Look how far we've come. From the locomotive yards to the steel mills. From a house divided to the doctor will see you now. The Masons, Unitarian, and plutocrats, Garibaldi and the candle maker, migrant farm workers and grocers. From Kids Sperry's and Pop Tyrrell's to the Sacred Hearts, the Knights of Columbus and Maccabees, the Manis and Black Community Club. From the Peanut Cafe to the Family Dollar, frontier town to vacant lots. On sleepless nights, we hear their song, their voices calling us back. Allegheny Ludlam, Niagara Mohawk and Cook's Brewery, the tugboats and fisheries, pesticides and the grape harvest. King Neptune and the county fair, from D-Day to Victory Day, Eisenhower and JFK, to the false prophets of urban renewal, the Merchants Bank and the Friendly Kitchen, Spaghetti Sundays and the cancer wars. Listen to their song, like a blast of wind from Ontario, like the waves that lap the beach. Liverwurst, TV dinners and grilled cheese, from Love Me Tender to Ave Maria, coffee in the morning, and I pray the Lord my soul to keep, Holy Thursday and the 4th of July. Like a rhythm that swells from the ground and shoots up into your boots, like cicadas in August, like the song the dead sing or the cry of a newborn. Listen as they call to us, like all our vagrancies, the history of our comings and goings, the doubts that invade our greatest aspirations and propel our return. Welcome home, they say. Welcome home and don't come back. I got a baseball poem for Mark. It's called Bat Boy. And it's a pretty self-explanatory. Bat Boy. Bottom of the 7th, the Lakeside Club down 4-1 against Dom Polsky. Man on 1st and 3rd. Dave Patterson crouches at the plate, squinting into a late August sun. On the mound, Tim Reed, who would go on to high school fame only to die of cancer before his 40th birthday, pivots his right foot as his left digs into the dirt. Amid the relentless chant of "hey, batter, can't hit," Reed winds up, delivers a fastball to Patterson, who leans into the pitch and swings. With a crack of the bat, everyone in the bleachers, including my mother, rises in unison to follow the ball's trajectory as it spins and hurls like a comet over the left field chain link. As Reed throws his mitt to the ground and Patterson trots triumphant around the bases, I, the bat boy, unable to play because of a club foot, scurry from the dugout like a possum to retrieve the discarded Louisville slugger. How absurd to think back on it now, all these summers gone, to imagine I heard my mother's voice above the din, cheering me on, as if I'd done something heroic, as if I were the one who'd hit the home run.
Well, I
Okay.
think we want to finish by 10 to 1.
Okay.
Wait, do we need to finish the whole thing by 1?
No, we can go a little bit over.
Okay. And you're not taking much of a rush.
Okay. This is called Among Strangers. When I was younger, my mother was part of Cairo's prison ministry. She'd go and talk to prisoners, and then they would have these weekend retreats, and a bunch of people would go and listen to people testify, ex-prisoners, and then we'd go to the prison to sing to them. This is about that. Among Strangers. In church that night, we listened to a tall, pockmarked man testify about the life he once lived, about the grocery clerk he'd killed. Standing at the pulpit, he coughed, loosened his tie, apologized. He'd come here tonight, he said, among strangers, after years in prison, to ask forgiveness. I swallowed hard, felt my legs tighten. I was 12 years old. I'd never met a murderer before. I wanted to ask how he did it, if killing someone was just like on TV, if he feared hell. I thought of my own sins, stealing candy bars, cursing God, throwing rocks at a neighbor girl. Later that night, my mother and I, along with others from the church, drove across Route 39 to the corrections facility. Rain drizzled, lightning stained the eggplant sky. We gathered outside the razor wire. Our shoes sank in the mud and wet grass. Wax from the tiny candles we were given dripped on our fingers. Someone started to sing on Eagle's Wing as a thin line of prisoners marched into view on the opposite side of the fence. Suddenly, as if an invisible cord had been pulled, they began to wave their hands and sway, while in the distance, a sleepy guard in a watchtower held us in his crosshairs, the way I imagined God held us in his hand. This poem is called Anniversary. All day I felt the need to call you, as if there was something important I should say. How do I explain this restlessness, this feeling of being stranded when all around me the world is in motion? You stopped breathing when I went into the other room. The hospice nurse assured me this was not uncommon. I imagined that if you could, you'd have leapt from the window and run away like an animal, embarrassed by your own helplessness. This morning, as I waited for the bus, snow fell in the glow of a streetlight, like the afternoon you died. It reminded me of fireflies swarming, falling yet never touching the earth. This past July, I quit my job at UTMC in Pittsburgh and went to Ireland with my wife for a month. And I got some new poems about Ireland. This is called On the Road to Bushmills, and it's after the poet Michael Longley. Because of a parade, the road to Bushmills is closed. It's the only road that leads to Portrush, a town less than 9 miles away, where we've been told there's a laundromat. At a roadblock on the edge of town, Union Jacks hang from lampposts and flap in the July breeze. A police officer, via a series of karate-like motions, directs us down winding roads lined with hedgerows and bell heather. We don't mention we're on our honeymoon. Instead, we shift our rental car into gear and drive toward Dundarve. Jackdaws and coal tits flutter and soar overhead, but they have more urgent tasks to worry over than ancient battles or marching bands or flags. After nearly an hour of wrong turns and backtracking, we once again find ourselves on the road to Bushmills. In defeat, we head back to our B&B, knowing we won't have clean clothes tonight. The jackdaws Kaya call, lost on the wind.
Is that good with you?
Yep. All right, gonna do the last 2 poems here. This one is called Chopin's Heart. And it was from a New York Times article in November of 2017, I first heard about his heart. Chopin's Heart. A brief apocalypse has taken possession of my person. The streets are full of melancholy. Yesterday, I fell asleep on the bus. The sound of someone crying woke me. Was it the woman slumped in her seat like a bag of laundry, or my mother, 40 years ago, the night Elvis died, and I held her hand as she trembled at the kitchen table? In the Times this morning, a story about Chopin's heart, found submerged in a brown liquid thought to be cognac. On his deathbed, Chopin asked that his heart be cut out and returned to his beloved Warsaw. Imagine if our own hearts could be extracted and one day discovered, swaddled like unholy relics. The first known depiction of a heart as a symbol of romantic love was found in a 13th century French manuscript, where a kneeling lover offers his heart to a damsel. In a tiny box marked My Tragedy, Chopin kept letters from his lover, Maria Wodzinska, who refused to marry him because of his lifelong ill health. Researchers found Chopin's heart to be massively enlarged and floppy, and covered in a white substance that gave it a frosted appearance. In the dim glow of my apartment, I listened to Elvis's early recordings. Obsessed with death, he visited funeral homes late at night to stare at the bodies. A child prodigy and leading symbol in the Romantic era, Chopin feared being buried alive. He often had vivid dreams of damned creatures inside his piano. Outside my window, the sun has fallen behind the rooftops on Highland Avenue. I feel blood pulse through my veins, feel my heart thump and flutter like a trapped bird. Each night I cut it out and place it in a tiny box under my bed, somewhere safe, lest I wake suddenly in the pitch dark with only the dank earth for comfort. My last poem is called On the Listowel Road, County Kerry, 1996. So when I was 25, I quit another job to travel to Ireland. And this is about one part of that trip. On the Listowel Road, County Kerry, 1996. Shocked by the flame of orange curly hair and beard that licked the edges of his plump potato face, I mistook his "Are you saved?" for safe and fell into the passenger seat, relieved to be off my feet, to feel the warmth of the car's heater. I'd been standing an hour at the roadside, trying to hitch a ride to Galway, rain and wind lashing my face like a million thistles, straps of my backpack digging into my shoulder blade. Gravel shot from under the tires as we pulled onto the narrow road. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tiny bird, like a smudge on the windshield, sputter across the sky, and disappear like a magic trick into a hedgerow. Are you saved? The man asked again after a mile or so, and suddenly I was annoyed by this breach of silence, the lilt in his voice, and the conviction it flaunted. When I was a child, my mother spoke of her faith in public, arms raised, swaying like I'd seen on TV, her voice high with that same naive certainty. And I bristled when her hands that once protected me from all I feared clasped mine, and she nudged me to sing along. What was it I expected to find here, where the road signs read Tarman, Tarbet, Ennis? Was I traveling in the right direction? No one can enter the kingdom, John writes in his gospel, unless he is born of water and the Spirit. I was 25 and on my own for the first time, 3,000 miles from anything I could claim as my own. I want you to meet my wife and daughter, the man announced, and parked his car in the driveway of a stone house. I waited until he slipped behind the front door before I ran. I ran and ran until my lungs forced me to stop, until I found myself, if not saved, then safe, aboard a ferry boat headed for the Shannon's far shore. Thank you.
So in the little time we have left, we want to discuss the last two poems. We'll get to that in a minute. But I want to ask Jason 3 questions based on stuff he set up here. So I don't know if you heard him. He said to me when he read the poem called My Father What, I don't know, that long title, he said, well, we can't discuss this one. I don't know what it means. So my question is, can you maybe talk about that? How often do you think you write a poem and you know what it means versus you don't know what it means?
50-50. I think it's about our distant relationship, but that's it.
Okay. And I mean, as a teacher of literature, I would say the poet's interpretation of a poem is just one interpretation. You know, once it's written, it's out there, it's text to be interpreted. Second question, you talked about going to Ireland a whole bunch of times. Twice, and quitting jobs, and you write about it. So what's the attraction of Ireland for you?
A lot of things. I've been trying to work on an essay about that too. So, music, literature, and I found in a dresser drawer that I still have newspaper clippings from the 80s that I had kept as a teenager of all IRA bombings. So the politics too.
Last question, and then we'll draw out questions on the last two poems for the people in the audience out there. So we're talking about places, Ireland. Jason mentioned he grew up in Dunkirk, New York, about 25 miles down the road. Is that correct? On Lake Erie, at one time a thriving lovely little industrial city, but when Jason was growing up, kind of turning into the Rust Belt. So I guess my question is, how did growing up in this part of the world in Dunkirk inform your poetry? Or how does it, or your sensibility, or how does Dunkirk affect you? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I'm glad I'm not living there anymore, but I write about it all the time. So it's always on my mind writing.
You might have picked up his mother comes up in the poems a whole bunch, and Elvis comes up a whole bunch. I know Jason loved his mother, who died of cancer not too long ago, and she was obsessed with Elvis.
Yeah.
So let's go to Chopin's Heart. By the way, I read this poem the other day when Jason sent it to me. I didn't know any of this stuff about Chopin. Did anybody know this stuff? And I didn't know if it was real or, if it was factual or not. It's factual. So the question I'm going to throw out is this, for people in the audience to respond to. In the poem, what connects Elvis to Chopin to the speaker of the poem? That's the question. Whoa. If nobody has any response, oh, thank you, Robin.
It seems to me it's a fascination with and a fear of death.
Just say it one more time and we'll repeat it.
I say it's a fascination with and a fear of death.
Fascination and fear of death is Robin's response. Okay. She's getting approval on her answer. Anybody else want to respond to that? I mean, Chopin and Elvis, both musicians, we normally would not connect them. Any other responses before Jason, I guess, is obligated to give a response? Yeah.
That is, you have taken us just to Elvis and Chopin. And what I like is the way you draw us back to you, to outside my window, and then make that association with your own heart. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I feel it, but I feel blood pulse through my veins, feel my heart thump and flutter. So it just, I don't know if that's what your intention was, but that seemed to be what you took this concept and made it personal.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
So what's your name?
My name is Victoria.
Victoria gave a great response. I don't know if I can paraphrase it. I'll let Jason try to paraphrase that one. What did she say?
I took Chopin and Elvis and with the heart, made it personal. To tie it back to myself, cutting my own heart out at the end, which I did not really do.
Anybody else want to either respond to that or say anything about that poem? Yeah, good.
They're both celebrities. They were both mythologized.
Both celebrities, both mythologized. I like that. And I guess part of the attraction of the poem is we're immediately interested in these two people. I like that response. Annie, somebody had a hand up. Yeah.
I guess the other question I have from the poet is, you read a lot of things in the time. Why did that story pop out to you to say, I'm going to write about that? Why
Did everybody hear that? The question is, why did this new story about Chopin pop out to Jason and inspire him to write the poem?
Well, I believe the headline that his heart was found in a church pillar. So it was hidden inside of a room. So that's what drew me to the story, because I didn't really know anything about him either.
in the beginning, did you know how you were going to develop that? Or you just thought
no.
that, or you just thought
I didn't even look at it to write a poem.
I guess, so what is your writing process? How do you,
So the question is, to Jason, what is his writing process?
meaning, does an idea come to you, does a feeling come to you, and then you develop it? And then do you work on what you develop, or?
Yeah, I try to write one full draft, first draft of something. And then rework it until I'm sick of it.
And I know Jason well enough to be able to say he's a disciplined writer. He's writing, or he has finished writing a memoir. What draft number are you on?
14 maybe?
14 drafts. Yeah. And when he told me he's writing a memoir, I said, you're too young to do that. Didn't your editor say the same thing?
I don't know, many people said that.
Yeah, but I've read a few pieces of it. It's pretty good stuff. All right, why don't we go to the County Curry poem? And instead of throwing out a question, would anybody like to comment on it or throw out a question? And by the way, this is not what usually happens in a poetry reading, but this is pretty cool to have a dialogue with the poet about his poems. Anybody want to comment or ask a question about that poem? So I'll throw out my question, which is, we go to the last line, and my question is, what's the connection between those two etymologically related words, saved and safe? How do they play off of each other in that last line?
Well, obviously, or theoretically, if you're saved, you would feel safe. But here, the opposite is played out. The idea of being saved makes him afraid. He doesn't feel safe. So this is a nice play with that.
So I don't know if everybody heard that. It's the opposite. One would think being saved, one would feel safe, but in the poem, the speaker feels afraid from being saved. So there are opposites in the poem.
And what is he afraid of? That's where it is.
Is that a question? Is that a question for Jason?
Oh, sure.
What is the speaker of the poem afraid of?
I think growing up with my mother joining religious groups like that, I'm very suspicious about people who try to push their faith on you. Not against anyone's faith, of course.
I have a question about your poems in general, which are fabulous to me, especially Jason Becker.
You are? No.
But what I wanted to ask you was, they seem to, a search and then a question, they seem to me to be so introspective, so therapeutic. And yet, when you've responded to questions here, it's almost, I think, as if you were taken aback. You hadn't maybe thought about that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, what once you write a poem, does it feel therapeutic to you? Do you think about that?
Yeah. The question was, does it feel therapeutic after writing these poems? Some of them I don't even, doesn't even register with me. I don't know, just trying to keep a memory. Sure.
All right, so does anybody in the audience have any other comments or questions, either on County Curry poem or anything to Jason? Yeah.
Yeah, I was struck in the County Curry poem. Well, somebody was saying safe, saved. That it seems to me at 25, which is what I guess you were at the time, you were actually trying to find what exactly would save you, and this sudden question about whether you're saved and then pulling you into a house with this wife and daughter must have felt very threatening to someone who was out in the world and trying to find something. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I mean. Oh my. That I felt threatened by the man who wanted me to meet his family, and that I was running away or trying to find what would save me, right? Yeah. I guess. I wanted to escape my hometown, I know that, and see the world.
Did you also want to feel independent?
Oh, yeah, very much.
I just that reference to your mother.
Yeah.
When you bristled, when she took your hand.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of rejected that. And,
Yeah.
And I wanted to move on.
I'm going to jump in and say three quick things. Number one, sitting next to Jason up here, I feel like a proud big brother. Not only do I think he's a terrific poet, I think he reads his poems out loud well. He will be here, so if people want to come up and talk to Jason afterwards, he's available. And he's going to read one more poem. That's how we'll finish.
Okay, thank you. This is another one from Ireland in July. It's called Walking to Omi Island, and it's a tidal island off the coast of Connemara in Western Ireland. Walking to Omi Island. We set off 2 hours before low tide, just as the guidebook suggests, and follow the signpost across the strand, where an archipelago of black volcanic rocks rise above striations of wet sand and rivulets of standing water, and all that the tide left behind, jellyfish, upturned crabs, and fronds of brown and gold seaweed, a mermaid's abandoned wedding bouquet. At mid-afternoon, we stop and eat a lunch of chorizo, Swiss cheese, and 2-day-old bread against a stone wall overgrown with gray and orange lichen, amid fields of woundwort and willow herb. Birds swoop and call in mismatched counterpoints. The skylark's busy chatter, the gull's pompous forzando. On the trek back across the strand, we watch a tractor in the distance rescue a van stuck in the incoming tide swell. I find a merlin's feather and put it in my pocket, a reminder of the gleam of sun on sand, the warm rush of wind, the sputter of salt spray on our faces. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A very great conclusion to a year of activities for the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. Things that you can look forward to next year and this year are the opening reception with friends, the book fair, the Authors Among Us book fair, the Robert Pinsky Favorite Poem Project, and the writing contest. I do want to remind you quickly of 2 literary events. At 3:30, Donnie Walton will be discussing her CLSC book, The Final Revival of Opal and Neb. And tomorrow at 12:15, the prose writer in residence, Hillary Plum, will be speaking on Publishing by and for People, a talk on independent and grassroots books and media. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for a great year. Hope to see you either in the remaining days or next year. Take care. Bye. Yeah, he does have books available for sale up there and signing. Yes, we did not mention that in the rush.